Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit more about court wizards, court magicians, and sovereign citizens, because that was a really common comment both here on YouTube and on X when I was talking about the last video that I made on the Carmelo Anthony trial and verdict, like why certain people just want to go to trial even though they're clearly guilty. All the evidence is stacked against them. And they believe that a lawyer is like a wizard. And if he just says the right things and has the best arguments and convinces the right people, then you're going to get to walk free out that door. And the sovereign citizens that people mention in comments are a great example of this, a belief in magic. That belief that if you just say the magic words, then people cannot have power over you. You've canceled out the power of the wizards in the courtroom. Now, I recall meeting people that believed in the sovereign citizen movement way back in the 1990s at gun shows. Now, you meet lots of interesting people at gun shows. And my dad, because he was a gunsmith and because he had a business buying and selling historic firearms, we met a lot of interesting characters while I was growing up, as well as into my adulthood until he died. And those people were always really interesting to me because they came off as like kind of crazed and highly energetic about their ideas. They really wanted people to know about their ideas, even though they treated them like a secret. They're like, you can just blah, blah, blah. And if there's a fringe on the flag, it's a maritime law. And I guess they did a King of the Hill episode where Dale Dribble believed that like the fringe on the flag was a maritime law. Dale is like, I've met Dale. I've met many people that are like Dale. What I love about King of the Hill is many of the characters are very archetypical for people that you meet in real life and that I've met in real life. That's why I always thought it was a funny show. Now, I don't remember that episode, but I have had people say that if there's a fringe on the flag, it's a maritime court and it doesn't have jurisdiction over you. And so the whole idea of the sovereign citizen movement is to basically speak a magic spell. You go in front of a magistrate, you go and there's a court and you say, prove that you have jurisdiction over me. And, judges and lawyers will look kind of askance. It's like, how do we not have jurisdiction over you? You're in the courtroom. There's a bailiff right there. Of course we have jurisdiction over you, right? Now, someone mentioned in the comments too that sometimes that spell actually works, where you're like, prove that you had jurisdiction. If you get like a traffic ticket on the border of like New Mexico and Arizona, you might be able to get out of the ticket because the traffic cop just doesn't want to, he's just lazy and doesn't want to put any effort there. But in reality, it doesn't work that way. But there's this belief, and I love it because it's one of those conspiracy theories that's really appealing to people, that if they because it gives them some mode of action to take advantage of the conspiracy theory, that there's this conspiracy of courts, that everybody is volunteering to have the courts have some sort of power over them, and it's all secret. And if you know the secrets, then you can avoid the problems with the courts. It gives you something to do. Whereas like flat earth, it's like, how do you respond to flat earth? Do you change what you do for flat earth? How do you respond to most of the, we could call them like alternate explanations, alternate theories? How are you supposed to respond to them? Sovereign citizen gives you something to do. Now, this something that you do never works out. But I've known lots of people that believed it really all the way into the 2010s. I don't know anyone now who believes in the sovereign citizen thing, but all the way into Internet 2.0, conspiracy theories were big and people loved to share their stuff on YouTube. Flat Earth was big on YouTube. And so I would know people and they would share me a video like, here's how a guy got out of this court because he's so smart and knew that he was a sovereign citizen and said these things. And if you have any experience in courts, you look at that and you're like, that's not what's happening. What's happening is a judge and a couple of lawyers are trying very hard to make sure that this guy is receiving his constitutional right to a fair trial and he doesn't end up in contempt. By basically trying to get past all of his like ridiculous statements and get to a point where they can actually have a judgment on the case, right? So it's this thing like, how do you have jurisdiction? You can't have jurisdiction over me. I'm a sovereign citizen. It's like the U.S. government has jurisdiction over anyone it wants to have jurisdiction over. Anyone on earth can be subject to the United States government. The only limit is like how far away can you be before you can't be killed by the U.S. government? And the answer is, it pretty much extends to the ends of the earth. But yeah, I had friends that were like, oh, if you get a court summons, that's just an invitation. You just like don't have to do that. And it's like, no, actually, you do have to go to court if you're summoned to court. It's it's legal and it's binding, and there will be consequences if you don't. You don't want to get a bench warrant, right? Yes, you actually have to do what the court tells you to do. Why? Well, because the court is backed up by the guns. It's backed up by force. It's backed up by law enforcement. These things are real because they will be used against you. So all the philosophical arguments that people have about government is illegitimate or government's not real, there's no such thing as the government, it's just people saying, yes, there's people in the government, they say they're part of the government, they have guns, they will point them at you and force you to do things. That is actually real. So if you're like, the government has no legitimate power, well, they have power over you, whether you think it's legitimate or not. It exists, and it'll be used. And the other thing is, no one is going to back you up. If you think the government shouldn't be able to take you to jail, no one's going to step in and save you. The only thing that opposes governments are like armies, right? So if you're part of a rebel army, I guess you can oppose the government, but no, nobody's going to stop the police from arresting you and taking you to jail. Likewise, a lawyer, what makes a good lawyer? Well, the people who don't understand things and think that basically lawyering is magic because they don't really understand legalese, they don't understand legal language. It sounds like magic spells, right? If you don't know what it means, it sounds like people speaking incantations at each other and then things happen. So it must be magic. So you get a good lawyer who knows the right things to say, and he can get you out on a technicality. He can make people ignore this thing and do this thing, and he convince them that you didn't do it and you can walk free. Or, in whatever, if it's a civil proceeding, he can get you out of paying your debts or something like that. The good lawyer has the command of the spells. His great language is what's going to get you off. But the reality of what a good lawyer is something different. And you could talk to lawyers about what a bad lawyer ends up being. Bad lawyers would shock you with how bad they are. Like, they don't show up to court. They forget to go to court, and their client's there and there's no attorney. There's bad lawyers out there, but a really good lawyer would generally know how to exploit asymmetries and manage the procedural part of the system in order to ensure that you have a fair trial, or that you have the best possible position in any kind of legal maneuver. It's a strategic game. It's not a game of magic spells, but a game of how you're going to exploit what two parties want and how you're going to figure out how to resolve those. And a good lawyer will know how to do that. So, examples of procedure would be knowing how to change a venue, knowing when to deal with continuances, things like that. And if you want a concrete example, if you're thinking of tort law, let's say there's, somebody is suing someone for personal injury, right? They got injured because of the negligence of a defendant party. Well, the defendant lawyer cleverly will do lots of maneuvering to postpone a court date. They'll do continuances. They'll force people to go to mediation. They'll push the court date back. They'll request for different court dates. They'll say that they can't get their witnesses there. The court date will get pushed back and back. Why would they do that? Well, because the injured party will be more and more desperate for money, because if they can't work while they're injured, their money runs out. Meanwhile, the money that they might get from a settlement will seem more and more attractive. So as you push it out further, the threshold for what someone is willing to be bought off with in the settlement money gets lower and lower. Now, they'll never tell you this explicitly, but it's a strategy that works. It's a strategy that exists. So when lawyers are speaking honestly, they'll talk about that sort of thing. But you can't really, they won't say on the record, oh, I'm doing this in order to make the defendant more desperate for money, so they'll take less than what they're actually owed or less than what they're asking for. They won't say that. But if we're talking about hypotheticals, what's the strategy? That's an example of one. So a good lawyer will know how to maneuver those things in order to put you in the best position, whether that's going to be tort or family law, or it's going to be criminal law. A goal of a good defense lawyer is to provide a good defense in order to put you in the best light, put you in the best position to either be acquitted or to maybe get convicted of as low a charge as possible. Part of that might be jury selection, right? Jury selection is big. If you can imagine how the O.J. Simpson trial might have gone differently if the jury selection had been different. So that's a procedural thing. That's not he didn't speak the magic spell to make the jury believe the words, right? They picked the right people in order to hopefully have the outcome that they wanted. Just examples of lots of the stuff that would go on. But for the people who believe in the dark wizard, the wizard in black and the wizards in suits, it's all about speaking the magic spells. And I think somebody in the comments had this anecdote. So he had a lawyer friend, or he was a defense lawyer, and the guilty verdict came out, and his client looked at him and says, "What do we do now?" And he goes, "You're going into custody. I'm going home. You're going into state custody. That's what's happening right now. Like, we're done. I'm a public defender, and I gave you the best defense I could, and the jury decided that you are guilty." I got a hair floating around here. Sorry. Just an example, and a really funny one when I think about this sort of thing, because people are shocked at, like, how did the lawyer spell? It must be that he's a bad lawyer. Well, no, he could be a really, really good lawyer and put you in the best position, but you were really guilty. Things were really not on your side. So there's a belief that the legal system exists to get people out of having to pay their debts, or to get people out of having to go to jail for a crime they committed, rather than a way to balance interests of, say, two parties in the case of tort, or like the state and the individual in the case of criminal law. But I love these sorts of conspiracies. They were really hot for a while. I feel like this one has really tapered off. There were some famous examples. Wesley Snipes thought he could avoid taxes by being a sovereign citizen. The same thing with Future Man from Bela Fleck and the Flecktones. Roy Wooten, Victor Wooten's older brother, who is the percussionist. He actually plays like a modified syntax from the 80s. Really, really interesting guy, but he got into the sovereign citizen movement and ended up owing huge amounts of back taxes, and they had to figure out, a way for him to be able to service his tax debt, because he thought if he just said magic words, he can avoid paying taxes to the US government. No, it turns out that you actually can't do that for practical reasons, regardless of whatever philosophies you might believe in. As the Constitution is not like a spell book. It doesn't bind people to act or not act. There's no magic rules that prevent people from doing one thing or another. The rules of a court especially are going to be what they are, and you're just going to have to learn to operate within that, I guess is my point. And it's the same thing with what does the Constitution mean? Oh, the Constitution gives me this, and I believe that this amendment means this. Well, the Constitution means whatever 9 unelected black wizards say it means. And it's no, it means what it says. Some justices believe that. Other justices believe it can mean whatever they want it to mean. And how it's going to be applied to you and other cases has to do with what those 9 elected black wizards think how it should be applied. Okay, so yeah, just because you have a different interpretation of the Constitution doesn't mean that yours is going to win. Doesn't mean you can argue for that different interpretation in court and that's going to work. I mean, you could do it. You can do anything, but that doesn't mean it's going to work. But anyway, I would love your thoughts. Leave your thoughts down below. If you believe in sovereign citizens, or you've met some sovereign citizens. I mean, I've met all kinds. Met all kinds of people on my journey in life, and they're always interesting people to meet. I always like the sovereign citizen one as far as alternate theories, because it gives people something that they think they're going to do, but the thing just doesn't really work out. And I think you don't hear as much about it because most of the people who are sovereign citizens aren't thumbing their nose at the U.S. government too often, right? They're not just they're not out and out criminals. They're people who are trying to figure out how to avoid taxes, and the IRS has some far-reaching powers for collecting taxes, I'm sorry to say. But have a good one, and I'll see you all next time. Check out Patreon down below. I do have a new free science fiction story. I'm working for completing another one for June for everybody, so that'll be good. And stay tuned. We are going to have a Hobbiton birthday this year, so there's going to be some free stuff coming out this week because I have my birthday. Donald Trump has his birthday. We have the 250th birthday of America coming up. So I'll see you next time. Have a great, great day.